Kuuntelet Setan podcastia nimeltä Sanoja. Sanoja-podcast sisältää henkilöhaastatteluja, joissa käsitellään ajankohtaisia sukupuolen ja seksuaalisen suuntautumisen moninaisuuteen liittyviä käsitteitä. Vieraillamme on aina painavaa sanottavaa. Ensimmäisessä jaksossa Peik Ingman haastattelee englanniksi yhtä 2000-luvun tunnetuimmista australialaisista ex-gay-aktivisteista Venn-Brownia. Haastattelu toteutettiin Helsinki Pride viikolla. Venn-Brown osallistui 70-luvun alussa eheyttämiseen tähtäävään ohjelmaan, joka edelsi tulevaa maailmanlaajuista Exodus-liikettä. Kokemus oli hänelle tuskallinen ja vain yksi monista yrityksistä muuttaa seksuaalista suuntautumistaan. Näistä kokemuksistaan Anthony kirjoitti oma elämäkerrallisen bestsellerin nimeltä A Life of Unlearning. Minä olen Setan tiedottaja Elisa Alatalo ja toivotan teille avartavia hetkiä tämän haastattelun parissa.
My name is Peik Ingman. I'm a project coordinator in a relatively newly launched project called Taakassa voimavaraksi, which roughly translates to from burden to resource. It's a non-confessional project for 3 years. There's 2 employees, and we've
By non-confessional, what do you mean?
Well, basically that. Well, if I say first that the aim of the project is to improve the situation for spiritual LGBTQ people on the one hand, and for LGBTQ people in general in religious and spiritual organizations.
Right.
What I mean by non-confessional is that even though our target audience or the people that we work with is primarily in a religious context, we do not ourselves have like a religious agenda.
Right.
That
Okay.
that our priority is only on the well-being of members of sexual and gender minorities. Yes.
So you're not attached to a particular denomination or even religious persuasion.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So today I'm here with Anthony Venn-Brown. I'm really happy to have managed to get him to come to Finland. He's just been in the UK for, what is it, a month?
Yes, I've had a month there. Yes.
Right. And after this, you're going to the United States.
United States for 6 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Spending time in New York. Hopefully catching up with people who were there for the Stonewall riots or living in the village during that time. I need to get some information from them that has not been unearthed really before. No one's gone down that track. Meeting up with former ex-gay leaders like Alan Chambers, head of Exodus, and Randy Thomas, who's the vice president. Others that I know, such as John Smith and Michael Bussey, who was one of the co-founders of Exodus, and also I've been well connected with anti-ex-gay activists since 2007 when I was over at the first ex-gay survivor conference, and so I've been meeting up with them and spending time in Washington and Palm Springs and San Francisco. It's like, I know people think, oh, this is wonderful, a trip of a lifetime, but actually it'll be work, but important work. So I'm researching for my next book.
Yes. So how far, can you tell me a bit about your book?
Sure. Look, this book is, the working title currently is The Quest to Cure Queers, Exodus to Nowhere. And what happened was I was asked to write for an academic journal on gay conversion therapy or sexual orientation change efforts, SOCE. And what happened was I was given a 4,000 word limit.
Okay.
As you are.
Right.
And so I had never actually sat down and poured out at that stage 15 years of experience and knowledge. And so I began writing and restraining myself while I'm writing, but ended up with 12,000 words. Some academic friends of mine said, this is a book, you should write this book. So I thought that I would go off to Bali for a month and just tidy it up and come back with a book. 3 years later, I'm still researching, I'm still getting information, and it's making progress. But I asked myself the question, Peik, that why was I in one of these programs, an ex-gay program, a program to change my orientation from gay to straight in 1972, when Exodus hadn't started in the US till 1976? Strange.
Good question.
Yeah, good question. And so probably the first question is, why was there a program in Australia in 1972? And it had already been going for several years. I wasn't the first to go through that. And then what was it that drove me? That was the other question. What was it that drove me? And out of all of that, what's happened is that I think I've got a whole new insight into this thing that no one's ever written about before, because I've lived that entire journey.
Right.
Yeah.
So in this 3 years time, where if you go back to when you were in Bali, right? Trying to, or did you actually go to Bali?
Yeah. And that was really there.
So would you say that has it changed along? I mean, has there been
yes.
total rearranging of thoughts around it?
There has been. It's a whole new approach. When I wrote that piece for the academic journal, it was an overview, but in the research, I've gone way back into behind the scenes. There are dots that needed to be joined together that people would see as isolated incidents. So if I mention the Jesus Revolution, that was there in the late 60s, early 70s. If I mention the charismatic movement, which was there, once again around that time, and then also the new Bible translations that came out, all these things went together to formulate what we would now call today gay conversion therapy. We take one of those elements out, and you don't have this phenomena.
Right.
Once that word appears within a sacred text, and there is a growth within Christianity through the Jesus Revolution, through the charismatic movement, that's where you find this phenomena blossoming. That it doesn't blossom within a Catholic context. It doesn't blossom within a progressive Protestant context, but it blossomed within the charismatic and Pentecostal movement. And David Wilkinson was a Pentecostal preacher who people might know of him through a film or book called The Cross and the Switchblade. And he was doing work with gangs and prostitutes and drug addicts in New York City. He became famous through his film, The Cross and Switchblade, but already he had begun working in New York with gay people and also in San Francisco. And he wrote a book in 1964 called Hope for Homosexuals, and inverted commas, and lesbians.
Okay.
Which is a tad amusing for all of us, I think, that he would tag them on there. My theory is that he actually is just duplicating what he's reading in the magazines about homosexuality at the time.
Yeah, okay.
Mental health professionals moved on. Dave Wilkinson didn't, because he attached sin and demonic spirits to homosexuality.
Yeah.
It's going to be fascinating.
It sounds fascinating. So this is one part of the book, tracing the roots of it. What about your previous book, A Life of
A Life of Unlearning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that was to a large extent autobiographical.
Totally autobiographical.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Will there be elements of that in this book?
That's interesting that you asked that question, because A Life of Unlearning began with the worst day of my life, which was when I was standing in front of a congregation of 800 people, having been a high-profile preacher, having spent 22 years to try and change my sexual orientation, having been married for 16 years, having 2 beautiful daughters, and now I've fallen in love with a man, and I'm confessing to the congregation I've committed adultery and I'm resigning for the ministry. So that's how A Life of Unlearning starts. And I've actually, we're in draft stage, but I've actually begun this book with the first chapter being my ex-gay experience in 1972. And what took me there and how horrific that was for me in those months that I spent in that residential program. And then, of course, I can go, and I was one of the first in the world to experience this. Since that, there have been literally tens of thousands of lives destroyed since that point. So what it was like was, it was like a rehabilitation centre. It wasn't purely a gay to straight one. They also worked with prostitutes, drug addicts, and homosexuals. They were the 3 key things. When I went in there, I'd already spent several years trying to change myself. I'd been through exorcisms, and this was like my last hope, really. And the woman who was running it told me when I went in for my first meeting that it would take probably 2 years.
Wow.
For me to go from being gay to being straight.
And staying there for 2 years.
Staying there. So, it was very much, I didn't go out. I had a mind looking after me all the time, watching me.
You had a what?
A minder.
Okay.
So right. Someone just watching me all the time. And
like a personal one?
Yeah.
So everybody had kind of like a big
only
brother.
Only initially.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were very concerned about masturbation.
Right. So these were like people who had been there for a longer time, kind of,
Yes. Well, this particular guy that was my minder was a straight guy, and he and his wife were part of the community, and so he would. We'd just be together, all the time, except sleep together, of course. And but he would stand by the shower to make sure I didn't masturbate in the shower.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had to have a quick shower, get out. That was all rather humiliating.
Yes.
But then of course you had to be up early. So you didn't lie in bed and masturbate. You had to make yourself really tired all day. So when you went to bed, you didn't masturbate, just went straight to sleep.
Right.
They're very fixated with masturbation because they saw that as being the downfall. Of course, you would fantasize about having sex with guys. So I was planning on being there, and what happened was the more you get transformed in your mind in a protected environment, the stronger you become, the more your natural, in inverted commas, heterosexuality comes to the fore, and then you are able then to go out progressively into normal society and live as a straight person. Right. It was very, very abusive. It was very oppressive. And I left after... I was there nearly 6 months, all up, and then because of all the experience, I just lost my motivation to change. And I said to them, the only way I could get out, really, was to say to them, look, I've lost my motivation to change. I know that it's terrible being gay, because I've heard so much about that. relationships don't last, you end up being lonely and old, and they're all bitches and da. I'd heard all this stuff, but I had never been a part of the gay scene. I'd had some gay experiences. So I said to them, I'll just go back, I'll go now and really live as a full-time homosexual and go to the gay scene, and then I'll end up really hating it. Then I'll have my motivation to come back and try again.
Interesting strategy.
Yeah.
Do you remember how did they respond to this?
They didn't want me to go.
Right.
You know, they didn't want me to go, but they also recognised that I had lost my motivation to change. Yeah, I was no longer a part. I was becoming more and more rebellious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, if I make
When I first went there, you know, and I was being monitored 24 hours a day, essentially, that during the day I would be doing manual tasks. So it would be maintenance outside the house or gardening, or I remember my minder, Paul, trying to show me how to fix a car engine. The bonnet up, and he was servicing or doing something, but you know, he was demonstrating this to me, and so it was always activities outside the house. I was never given activities like cooking or doing the dishes or domestic cleaning. They were all female jobs, and I had to do the male jobs. Also, the way I dressed, like, you know, they went through my wardrobe. Because my wardrobe, well, the funny thing is they said, you know, we know that homosexuals like bikini underwear.
We do?
We are talking, you know, early 70s.
Right.
And I remember that maybe I lingered a little too long in the underwear aisles in department stores. It was the closest thing I ever had to porn. Right. But so they had to go, and my underwear was replaced with white fronts, just white, which, you know, became very sexy with the Calvin Klein. But those days that was like the daggiest underwear, non-sexy underwear that you could get. I had some pink socks. They went. So there was that as well. So this is the way you dress as a male, and there was very much a uniform in this place for males and for females. So yeah, there was that conditioning. Trying, you know, this is the way a man is.
So if this gives us a little bit of a view of what it was, and this was a program. One of the first programs of this kind
in the world.
Right. How would you say that? How have these kinds of programs since then progressed or changed?
Well, that's interesting, the way that has evolved and developed, because as the gay rights movement began to grow. There were within churches already gay people, and gay people were tormented about the conflict between their faith and their sexuality, and so they began to seek help. And there had been people like myself that had a conversion experience, quite dramatic, spiritual experience, which made us believe initially that we were no longer gay.
Right.
Very emotional, highly emotionally charged experience, and
so you would say that you had such an experience?
Yes. Okay. And at different levels too through my Christian journey. I think, now I found the answer. Like, first of all, it was my conversion. I thought, I'm free now. Because I'd attempted suicide, I'd been in depression, I came to Jesus, I had this experience. I go, it's so wonderful. But then the desires started to creep back. And then I got involved in the charismatic movement, and they said, what you need is the baptism of the Holy Spirit. You need the Holy Spirit power. So when I experienced that, once again, there was this wonderful emotional release, which made me think I'm right now. Then I was told, well, when that didn't work, that there was demonic forces. So once I went through those experiences of exorcism, then I went, oh my God, now I'm free. And then, of course, that wasn't the case.
Wow.
And that's when I went into the rehabilitation program as a last resort, really. So it was in around the early 70s that groups and organisations began to form of gay people, which were focusing specifically on the gay, in inverted commas, problem.
Okay, and they meaning what was their take on it?
Oh, that they wanted to change.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Love in Action started in San Francisco at San Rafael as a community of gay men, but that was about change as well. And then at Melodyland Christian Center in Los Angeles, Michael Bussey was there, and they were on the helplines. They had it was like a lifeline call. People in crisis would call in, and they were getting more and more gay people calling in, being troubled. And then they had this big influx of inquiries. And then in 1976 they had their first meeting, and that's when Exodus was formed. Right. Then from that, then there were big groups all over the US and in Australia and in Europe and the UK, everywhere. And then there was, Exodus became the umbrella organisation for all these independent ex-gay groups.
Right. That's interesting, I think, because one of the preconceptions that I think some people might have about ex-gay movements is that while they might think that the leaders or the people who run these programs might be closeted gay people, at times I think there's still this strong assumption that there's these gay victims who are being forced into something that they don't want to do, whereas what actually seems to have happened was that the background for Exodus was actually gay people who wanted to change and who sought support from one another.
Yes.
to change together, and in some sense that's to me that seems even more sad, or because then it's not quite as clear cut that a lot of the trauma behind here is this involvement in it, that
in those early years, people were not forced.
Exactly, yeah.
People were seeking help. And, you would hear Alan Chambers say today, which some people really don't like, is that Exodus saved some people's lives. And we have to admit, yes, it did. It also killed a lot of people.
Right.
So, but those people were looking for support, looking for help, looking for answers, as I was. And that's one of the things I'm going to highlight in this new book, is about the horror of discovering you're gay, the terror around that, the desperate need to find an answer, to find a cure. Even in prison at times, some people who'd been in prison were begging for more to be done to help them, to cure them, because they knew outside in society it was so horrific for them to be a gay man that they were desperate to change. And that's why like myself, I mean, I'm not alone. I spent all those years desperately looking for an answer. What we do have today is, of course, within a Christian context, we often have Christian parents
Right.
who are saying to their kids who are coming out or who are trans, you can't be like this. This is not the way God meant you to be. And there has been pressure. When that's been discovered, like for example, Love in Action, when young Zach, his blog post was leaked out that he was thinking about killing himself and his parents were putting him into this place, that the end result of that was that whole organisation blew up and closed down.
Yeah.
It was one of the big scandals in Exodus. I think it would be good also just to acknowledge this. My experience in a residential program is very, very dramatic. But this is not everybody's story. But everybody's story is the same in that there is self-hatred, that there is self-loathing, that there is complete ignorance around sexual orientation, that there is this philosophy and belief that this is not what God wants for me and God has the power to change me. Now, whether that's happening in a rehabilitation or residential type program, of which there are hardly any of those left, to in a local church, it's all the same. And I don't want people to think, oh, you know, well, that's all over, because it's happening today. All the beliefs are still there.
Yeah.
We have a problematic term at the moment, and it's very popular, and I have tracked its popularity, and it's going up in the media and on the internet. The term ex-gay reparative therapy peaked around the 80s and it peaked around the 80s and 90s, and then it's been waning. And now the most popular term is either conversion therapy or gay conversion therapy. So we need to be really clear. We're talking about two very distinct things here. Within a mental health professional context, yes, there are people who are still working with clients who believe that homosexuality is disordered and that they can work with people in a therapeutic sense to change them.
Right.
In some places like China, India, South America, in Africa as well, I would say, yes, in Africa as well, that there are extreme cases of the old style of aversion therapy going on, electric shock treatment, chemicals being used to make people vomit.
Right.
So some of those old things which are no longer used in a Western context are being used in these places and people making claims. So that would be once again what we would maybe say conversion therapy, that there's a definite agenda to convert people through either a therapeutic or a medical model. The biggest threat of all for gay and lesbian people, and the biggest harm that is happening, most widespread, is within religious contexts. So there is no aversion therapy going on there. There are no chemicals being used. And in fact, there's not really therapy in the traditional sense. It's more spiritual counselling, because they're in a context where you can't come out because this is considered against God's order. This is not what God wants. God made man and woman. He didn't, the old thing about God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and all those things. So people are never affirmed or accepted and they're made to feel broken, disordered, unnatural, and then they're told that God can help them overcome this struggle.
Right. How much is this last one? How much have you come across it as God is testing you?
Oh, okay. So that is one of the many things that people will go through, as in like this is your thorn in the flesh, which
right.
is a biblical reference to Paul saying that he was struggling with something. He never names it, and there's theories about what that was. And then God just said, well, my grace is sufficient for thee, so my strength is made perfect in weakness, right. The scriptures said. So that is sometimes a part of their journey, because when you're in that highly religious context, you keep looking for answers all the time, and you're going on a journey trying to think, that's the answer, God's given me a thorn in the flesh, I'm just going to overcome that. We do have now, we talked about the groups previously, and how few of them still exist. Some of those have morphed now into what we would call a celibacy model. So they don't preach change anymore, but they're preaching, well, this is the way you are, you just can never act on it.
Right.
Now the problem with that, Peik, is that nothing has changed around the philosophy except one thing. And that one thing is God can change you. All the other garbage about you being broken, about it not being God's order, and about it being unnatural, all those things, and caused by a dysfunctional upbringing, all those things still exist. There's only one that isn't there, and that is God can change you. So those other four are just as damaging, living with a belief system that you're somehow lesser because you're gay, lesbian or trans.
Yeah.
Of course, what they're saying is you can never act on it, and this is what they don't get, is they're saying you can never fall in love.
Exactly.
You could never have a relationship or even a long-term, a lifelong partner like everybody else, and it's like a curse. You've been hit with you've got a curse on you because you're gay, which means you can't be like everybody else.
Right.
This is as damaging walking around with that going through your brain as me for many years thinking I had a demon of homosexuality. This is not good for one's mental health.
No.
I'm not sure how it is in Finland, but in my world back in Australia, the Pentecostal churches, the mega churches, the average pastor, youth pastor, has not necessarily done a lot of academic study.
Sure.
Is that similar here?
Well, depending on the, many conservative denominations do kind of emphasize a kind of humility that sees higher education as a threat.
Right, so, yes. That goes way back to my very early days of being converted, 1969, and then I remember going to my first Pentecostal church, and I remember hearing that, don't ever go to university because you lose your faith.
Right.
It's like, like any thinking is a threat to faith because, so that still exists. So in many of these contexts, and I know that is changing, that, there are people having doctorates and bachelor, that is changing in Australia, but still there's very much this, if you're a charismatic type person and you demonstrate some leadership qualities, and you are pastoral in the sense that you care for people, that is recognised as a gift, and that gift would be nurtured, and so you may start off as a home group leader, and then the cream of the home group leaders become maybe assistant pastor or youth pastor, and so you move up the chain. But I mean, I know of a big mega church pastor in Australia who makes statements about homosexuality, and the amount of time he actually spent in Bible college back in the 70s was minimal. Like, his education is really, really poor. And he's certainly not a theologian, but he makes statements as, his statement would be, I believe what the Bible says. Go, well, I don't think you've actually really studied that.
Right.
You don't know about the historical context, the cultural context, you don't know about the original languages, but you believe what the Bible says about homosexuality. So we do have this situation where we have leaders within the church who really are not formally trained, and so say a young guy would come to, say, a youth pastor or a young girl and say, I think I'm gay, or I think I'm a lesbian. These will be the responses. One response might be, no, you're not. You're heterosexual.
Right.
We're all heterosexual.
Yeah.
We've got to help you overcome that problem. There might be, well, you must have been abused. Do you remember when you were abused? So these people don't have any concept of what orientation is, so they start a line of questioning, or they may believe that it's a demonic force and that they're going to pray over the person to release some of it.
Yeah.
So, there are all these responses. This is going on every day within Pentecostal, charismatic, evangelical churches.
Right. And so banning conversion therapy will not touch that.
No.
It will have no, because it's virtually impossible to
It's not regulated.
Right.
It's a Christian belief system.
Right.
I mean, some Christians believe in a personal devil. They're resisting the devil every day. I've just been reading a book by a woman who was an ex-gay leader in Australia, Shirley Baskett, and her book is titled Outrunning the Devil, I think it is. But in the first few chapters, it's always the devil did this, the devil tempted me, I was going to overcome the devil. It's like, well, you're so fixated about Satan, and can we legislate and regulate a belief system like that? That's challenging.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be lots, if we're going to tackle this thing intelligently, we have to do a lot of thinking, Peik.
Yeah.
We really have to, and we have to separate what we're talking about. I do like every mental health professional association should have a statement policy about this. In the UK, the Christian Counsellors Association have said no. None of our practitioners are to do reparative therapy, which is essentially to try and fix what was wrong with you that made you gay so that you're no longer gay.
Right.
So, and in Australia recently, that slipped in under the radar that the Christian Counsel Association have also got that in their code of ethics. So all of these mental health professional organisations should have policy statements and should be regulated amongst their members. That's one thing. And I like what Stonewall in the UK did, that they've got a memorandum of understanding and listing all of the mental health professional organisations and associations. So that's really an important thing to do. Regarding what's going on in the church, I always say, Peik, the enemy is ignorance. And we're very quick to attack people and organisations, but it doesn't necessarily get to the root of the problem.
Right.
And the enemy is ignorance. And so how are we going to educate, inform, and help Christians to understand your orientation is not a sin. And the naturalness for me to fall in love with a man is exactly the same as natural it is for you to fall in love with someone of the opposite gender.
Right.
And there's nothing evil, there's nothing broken, there's nothing at all wrong with it. That's just the way it is. And when it's allowed to flourish, and when it's allowed to be expressed in an affirming environment, it's one of the most beautiful experiences you'll ever have as a human being. I think that I remember speaking at a conference in Phoenix in 2008, and I think it was the first time that I had ever said this, and I still believe it, and that is that the LGBTI community is a gift to the church. And it is a gift to the church in that if there is any group that will teach the church about what grace and unconditional love is, it's the LGBTI community. Because if they can embrace them, they will have learnt what true love is really all about. Their belief system is like a very, very solid wall. It's like a fortress made up of many bricks that are all cemented together. It is solid. We are asking them to take out one of those bricks and have a look at it. It's the gay brick.
Right.
And we're saying, you got that gay brick wrong, it doesn't belong in the wall. And if they come to that conclusion, then what about all the other bricks? Yeah. And so that's a challenge. And some people don't get that why it's so challenging for some Christians to accept homosexuality as being an orientation, not an abomination. And that's why, because the whole foundation for their faith is based on a literal translation of the Bible that said, God says it, that's it, it's settled. Mm. Well, of course, they don't realise is that, yeah, God may have said it, but how you interpret it right. has changed and will continue to change, as with slavery, as with women speaking in the church, as with divorce, as with mixed marriages. The list goes on and on and on. And every time there's been a change in society, the church has opposed that, and the scriptures have been quoted to back up their position. So this is the challenge they must face. I've worked with ministers who have done that successfully, have pulled out the brick, looked at it and go, no, that's wrong, it doesn't belong there. I don't know whether they patched up the hole in the wall or what they did, but they have embraced LGBT people within their congregations, and some have moved to a place of affirming them as well.
Would you say that, have you seen, we're talking about, you said earlier that you've been working with these issues for, you said 17 years.
Yeah, my first, after I resigned from the ministry, I thought I was going to go to hell.
Right.
Because I had accepted that I was gay. Or as some people wrote about me, they said he's given in to his homosexuality. And that was there subconsciously for me as well. Because there was nobody in my world that said, you could be gay and a Christian. That was unheard of. Back in 1991 for me, that was unheard of in my world. No one supported me. No friends, nobody. There's nobody at all. I was on my own. So I walked away from everything. And it wasn't until, say, 6 years later, I had a quite spiritual experience that enabled me to resolve my spiritual belief system and realise that I'd thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and that there actually were some things about my previous belief system which were universal and fundamental, and I needed to embrace them and integrate them into my life again. That was a very profound experience. And so then, from there, I kept on going, and I forgot where I was going with that question.
Yeah, well, I was asking...
I went back.
Yeah, I was... we can hinge on to that. My question was actually, or I didn't actually get to asking the question, but I was saying that, okay, so if we were talking about a 20-year or so period of time, and during that time, would you say that you would have seen a difference within the LGBTI community and their understanding of the plight of religious queers?
Yes, part of my role, I will go back to what I was talking about, because I think it adds to this progression. So when I resolved my faith and my sexuality and reintegrated a sense of spirituality, then I didn't know any other ex-gays like me. I didn't know anyone who'd had an experience. I didn't even believe there was another Pentecostal minister in the world who was gay. This is how isolated I was. And then, of course, I discovered the internet.
But can I interrupt? So did that mean that you needed to kind of be closeted about, like, but you had gay friends?
Oh yeah, I was totally the gay scene.
Right. And where did you feel like you had to be closeted about your kind of...
Oh yes, there's shame attached to that. So I talk about that in that report that I wrote recently, that there is a second closet for many of us.
Exactly. Yeah.
That we may have come out about our sexuality, but we remained in a closet about our faith or about our Christian experience. And that's just as harmful as having a closet of unresolved conflicts around your orientation or your gender identity.
Yeah.
Through the internet, I began to discover various things, and I formed a online group of ex-gay survivors, and had 400 people in that. So I started connecting, with others, and so that was in 2000. So it's been since 2000 that I have been involved in this activity.
Okay.
Yeah. Got there at last.
Right. And I mean, that sounds great that you've created this kind of peer support for people who would you say want to maintain a connection to to religiosity or spirituality, or would you say that want to just not have to hide it, their background, or...
Yeah, look, one of the things that I've done in Australia, and of course, we do need to acknowledge the work that has been done by so many people such as Troy Perry. I mean, in 1968, the year before Stonewall, he met with 12 people in his lounge room and started MCC, the Metropolitan Community Church. And, that has done amazing work. When I came out and started to do the work that I have been doing, there was not a great deal of awareness about LGBT people of faith. In fact, there was a hostility. There's such a hostility towards religion that even a gay person with a religious belief system or holding on to a faith was condemned.
Right.
So, I had to work at creating an understanding of the diversity of our community. And yes, there are gay Christians, and yes, there are gay Muslims.
Yes.
And there are gay Jewish people, and there are gay Buddhists, and there. So whatever belief system you come across, you will find, of course, people within that. In some, it's more challenging than others. I love this little analogy. There was a time you would go into a gay bookshop, and you could hardly find a book on being gay and Christian. Now it's a whole genre of literature. And what we're starting to see now appear is stories about queer Muslims. And once again, so it's like maybe about 40 years we've had this gay Christian thing growing, and more acceptance within our community. And now, of course, it's getting broader, including people of Islamic faith.
Yeah.
And the challenges that they face within their communities, their families, you know. We've got a lot of work. Here's something that I observed very early in the piece when I began this work, was that the church was preaching, you can't be gay and Christian. And the gay community was preaching, you can't be gay and Christian. The same message was being preached by both groups. And what did that do for the people who were gay and Christian, who were there in the middle, who were copying it from both sides? Hostility from both sides, rejection from both sides. And this was very, very harmful, and that's why to have those polarised opinions is so harmful. And it is a journey that we go on to resolve faith and sexuality for ourselves. A church that is going to move through various stages. A denomination, no one moves from being anti-gay to being gay affirming overnight.
Right.
There is a series of steps. Shall I run through those for you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Please.
So this is the continuum that I work with. On the left-hand side, we have hatred. And yes, there are people who hate gay people. God hates fags is a Westboro Baptist Church, disgusting people. So people can move from hatred to dislike. I don't hate gay people, but I just don't like them. From dislike to discomfort. From discomfort to tolerance. Some people move from tolerance to acceptance. Some people move from acceptance to affirmation. And then finally, the final step is advocacy. And I've seen individuals shift along that continuum and become advocates. Straight people, churches, ministries, organisations, and even shifting one of those steps, one of those positions on the continuum can cause a flurry of controversy. Hillsong is a good example. Hillsong Church is that, when the pastor Brian Houston made a statement in a media conference in New York, he said, when he was asked about gay marriage, he said, we're having a conversation about that. Which they were. But immediately the Christian conservatives got up in arms going, what do you mean you're having a conversation? There's no conversation. It's sin, it's immoral, God would never ever allow gay marriage. And then there's a bit of a backflip, a media release to sort of placate, the conservatives. And so it's dangerous ground shifting. I think my role is to pick up people where they're at and take them one step. If I've taken them one step, I've done my job. I don't work with people in the hatred space.
Would you say that if we work with this image of a line, have you during your time working with these issues, have you ever seen like a regression and felt that there's something in about your approach or someone's approach that has been kind of complicit in that regression? Do you understand?
Oh yeah, oh yes. I always say, one step ahead you're a leader, 2 steps ahead you're an innovator, 3 steps ahead you're a martyr.
So go slow.
Yeah, pace yourself, and I've seen people pay the price that, and you know, in the scheme of things, maybe some people have got to be martyrs. But I know some of those people, and I know the pain that they've experienced. But then again, they have experienced this pain that many of us have. They've experienced the rejection. They're no longer getting invitations to speak. You know, their churches have been taken from them. You know, so there can be that regression. There's this other thing that I talk about as well. I cover a lot of this stuff in seminars and workshops, and I talk about the homosexual hip hop.
Okay.
That people will make a progressive move, but then the backlash is so strong that then they will go back. So it's like 3 steps forward, 2 back. You know, yeah. And a good example of that as well would be the American World Vision, who at one point decided they were going to give the same financial compensation to same-sex couples that they gave to heterosexual couples. What happened was that this was a huge backlash, and people stopped giving to World Vision in America, that's nasty.
Yeah.
Really nasty. I mean, they're looking after the poorest in the world, but that's what happened, and then they had to do a backtrack on that and withdraw their original intention.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that if I'm asking the question partly as someone who works with these similar kinds of challenges of trying to create change, is there anything in your approach that has thereby changed, you know, through an awareness that these risks are possible? Yeah,
when I work with churches in a consultative approach, we would work on a strategy, and the purpose of this strategy is that it minimizes polarization.
Right.
Of course, if you move too fast, Peik, and people are not ready, you've got to go at a pace where they're coming with you. They're not being pushed, they're not being dragged, they're coming with you. Yeah. And that's probably that thing about, you know, 1 step ahead your leader, an innovator, third your martyr. And that takes a lot of wisdom in doing that. Now, that's very frustrating for some of us gay and lesbian people. And what I say is it's going to take, to move, say, church, for example, it's going to take some Christians within that church to be in a place where they can live with some ambiguities. But it's not going to happen without some gay and lesbian people in there as well. And their contribution to that journey is patience, love and grace.
But somehow it needs to be differentiated from niceness or spinelessness.
Yes, Exactly. Just a recognition we're on a journey in this together, and you are finding out answers. I'm here as a part of this process, and this is going to take some time. I would say for most churches, you're looking at at least a 2-year process, depending on where they're coming from, of course.
Yes, you mean with churches, you mean a congregation or you mean a denomination?
Oh, good point. A congregation.
All right.
Yeah. A denomination probably would be more challenging because within the it's like, well, a denomination is like a congregation. You have a whole variety, whole spectrum of understandings, of knowledge, of attitudes, everything. And within a denomination, you have quite a variety of beliefs. Look at the Anglican Church. Look at the Catholic Church. You know, you can't say this is the standard, because you'll get Catholic churches which are completely accepting and affirming. You get others, you know, but the hierarchy, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.